Hi everyone, welcome back. For this video, I want us to just pick up where we left off in class on Wednesday and go back to Akrotiri, which was that site that was buried by the volcano on the island of Santorini back about 1600 BCE, so 3,600 years ago. All right. Um, and for today, what I want us to do is do a deep dive. Because what is sort of interesting about the wall paintings on Thera is that because of the way that they were buried by the volcanic ash, we have a very, very good idea, not just of what wall paintings they were, but where they were on the walls, what story they were on. Usually we find wall paintings in pieces where they have fallen somewhere. But that's not the case here, which allows us to understand what we call a pictorial program. All right. And a pictorial program is basically taking all of the elements of the room, wall paintings, any objects, the placement of the wall paintings, taking all of those elements and putting them together and trying to understand what the message of the room was. Was there a message of the room? There isn't always, but in this particular case, there definitely is. And we're sort of very, very fortunate that the preservation of this site is such that we can really sort of explore what that's like. This is not a visual analysis. This is an iconographic analysis, right? We're looking for symbols. We're looking for things that we have seen in other places to try and help us interpret the subject of these paintings. It is also a contextual analysis because we are dealing with the use of space, right? We are dealing with how these paintings would have been seen, how they would have how people might have seen them, how people might have interacted with them, and how the paintings interact with each other. So this is not a visual analysis. This is contextual analysis. And pay attention to sort of the way that I'm doing this, because this is basically what your third essay is going to be. Is I'm going to give you a room in Pompeii and send you to town and see what you can come up with. It will be easier than this one. This one happens to be particularly difficult. All right, but I'll find a room that's not quite so terrible. So we're going to look at it. We're in a building called Xeste 3. All right. And here, sorry, my dog is trying to crawl on me. Just a second. You want to say hello? Here's my puppy. Say hello. There she is. Okay. Go back down now. All right. So here is Xeste 3. You can see it right here. It's got a couple of little windows. And you can see that it's preserved to quite a tall height. We don't usually see this in buildings that are, over 3,000 years old, but there it is. There's Xeste 3. And here is what the inside of it looked like. To read this, what you can see, right? You can see how this bows out. This is a cutaway, right? So this would have been the floor. So this is a lower story and an upper story of this building called Xeste 3. And we basically have paintings in 2 rooms on floors that are up above and below each other. If you look at the bottom floor, you have some steps down into a very, very small room. And we know this type of room from other sites on Crete, other Minoan sites. It was originally called a lustral basin. Now sometimes we call it an aditon. What it basically is, it seems to be some sort of small ritual room. There's sometimes a drain in it. It often has little small vessels in it. I showed you those vessels that where you pour and it comes out the other side, the rhytons. Sometimes you find those in these rooms. They seem to have a religious use, but we really don't know what that was. And you have 2 of the walls, right? So you have this fresco of 3 girls, okay? Here's one, she's carrying something. Here's one who looks like she's hurt her foot. Here's another one carrying a veil. There's a rocky landscape in here. We'll look at these in more detail. On the other wall, all right, is a very, very poorly preserved fresco of an architectural feature that we know from other parts of Crete. And this is, we can recognize this as what we call the horns of consecration. This is, I think I showed them to you. Remember, we were talking about how important bulls were to Minoan ritual and religion. This, we think, is a sort of a very stylized depiction of bull's horns that tends to be on the tops of shrines, right? We tend to see this particular symbol on buildings. There were plenty at Knossos, and we see them in art as well, associated with Minoan shrines. So this seems to be a shrine, okay? So that's the lower room. The upper room, so right, we've got the wounded girl, we've got the horns of consecration. In the upper room, we have this fresco, okay, of girls in a rocky landscape picking flowers. And we're going to get to talking about that. This is the one that's actually in your book, right? When you look through the book and you're reading about the saffron gatherers, this is that fresco right here. What you don't realize from the book is that it is actually part of this huge pictorial program that is happening here. Then on the final wall, look at that, right? So now we have architecture again. We're looking at somebody who is seated. There is a griffin behind them. This is a goddess, okay? You can already probably tell just by the fact that they're seated, so that they're oversized, the way that they are a little bit higher, the association with a fantastic creature. We are looking at deity here. And what's happening is here you have a worshiper bringing things to the goddess, right? Here's another scene that we know very well from Mesopotamian art, right? So here's a human figure. This figure, you will see, is blue. It has a tail. This is a monkey, all right? Monkeys seem to be often in Minoan art the go-between between the goddess and human beings, okay? So that's our pictorial program. So what we're going to do is now just take a look at the frescoes themselves. Oh, let me move me. That's terrible. Okay, so we're going to start in the upper room. And here you can see the actual condition of the frescoes, which is pretty awesome, but also not always that great. So up here, you can see the face of the goddess, right? She's wearing a necklace of dragonflies. You know what? I need a better picture of this for you. I'll find one and post them to the Blackboard. Here are the wings of the griffin back behind her. She's got this very, very elaborate skirt on and the shrine. And then here is that blue figure, right? And what you can see is that he's handing something to her, but we don't know exactly what. Our guess is, okay, comes from what this girl is doing, all right? Now, this one, she is pouring a basket of something, okay, onto this altar in front of the goddess. What is that something? To figure out what that something is, we go over to the saffron gatherer fresco. Here we have two girls in the landscape. One of the interesting things about this, do you see how this girl's head is blue? It's shaved. We are fairly certain that Minoan children and youth had shaved heads, right? That they had shaved their heads with just sort of a tail growing out. And that at some point, as they grew older, they grew long hair again, right? So you see the goddess has these very long, flowy, curly hair. And this is probably a very young girl with a shaved head and just a tail of hair. And what are they doing? They are on this rocky landscape. This is the same kind of landscape that we saw with the spring fresco, right? You have all of these sort of hills, imagined and otherwise, and on them are crocuses. Turns out crocuses are a plant that is sacred to the Minoan goddess. We often see crocuses in Minoan art. It seems like they were harvested for saffron. The saffron crocus blooms in autumn. They were harvested for saffron, which could then be used as dye. It could be used for food spice. It could be traded. It was very, very valuable. Even today, saffron is easily one of the most expensive spices that you can get at the store. But here they are, they're harvesting it. And that seems to be what this figure is now offering to the goddess, right? They harvest the saffron, they pull the little stamens out of the bloom, and that's what contains the stuff that they will use for dye. And here she's pouring out a basket full of these crocus stamens. So we are looking at some sort of religious festival. We are looking at some sort of ritual, some sort of event. It involves crocuses. It involves young women. It involves taking the products of, it involves crocuses, it involves young women, and it involves an offering to the Minoan goddess. That's about as far as we get, right? Like, okay, so this is something that we wouldn't be able to get from, right? We don't have any literature from the Minoans. We don't know any of their stories. We don't know any of their mythology. This right here is 100% as close as we are going to get. So now we're seeing something that they are doing with their religious life. So we're going to put that together with these ones underneath, okay? So in this panel on this wall, you would have seen it as you were entering this underground space, okay? All right, here you have an older woman, right? She's got all of this long, flowy, curly hair, all right? And she's holding a necklace, and she's bringing it to this girl, all right? On the other side of that girl, you have another woman. We can't tell exactly how old she is, and she is carrying a yellow veil, right? That's saffron makes a yellow dye, so this might again be a reference to saffron. We see more saffron growing on the hills, and in the middle is this figure who is holding her foot, and her foot is bleeding. We don't know. This is a narrative depiction, right? This is a narrative piece. It is probably it's probably the retelling of a Minoan myth, right? It is probably very early mythology that because we don't have the records, we don't know what the story is, but this is telling some sort of a story. Right? There's these people, they are bringing something to this girl. Looking at later Greek myths, this might have something to do with what would become the mysteries. So the mysteries of spring, the death of Persephone, who goes underground during the winter and then comes back in the spring. We don't know, but there seems to be this seems to be a myth. All right. Now we get to this other panel where we see the horns of consecration. All right. And just to show you what they looked like in other art, this is that Aya Triada sarcophagus that I showed you in class. This is the opposite side from the one that I showed you. And here you have a Minoan shrine, and you can see on top of it, you can see all of these little tiny horns of consecration. This is how the roof line of a Minoan shrine was decorated. Well, now here's the thing. On this Minoan shrine we've got these red streaks. All right. This is a reconstruction. The pieces themselves are pretty badly preserved. This gets really controversial. People are still talking about this. So the question is, what are these red streaks? The suggestions have been crocus stamens, which would fit with here. Other suggestions would be blood, right? Maybe this was a sacrifice. Maybe it has to do with the wounded girl. Nobody knows, right? People sort of are evenly divided on what this red is. But when you take it all together, okay, this whole set of rooms, what we think we might be looking at is some sort of puberty initiation ritual, right? We have young women of various ages, right? Here's a very young woman. This one's older. We have a couple that are in between. So the question is, right, what is the blood? Does it have to do with menarche? Does it have to do with girls starting their periods? That is often a time where you will find sort of puberty rituals in culture. So it wouldn't be weird if there was some ritual around that. We're not entirely sure, right? But it does seem to be telling a story about a religious ritual that is about crocuses. It is about making offerings to the goddess, and it is about the transition from youth into adulthood. So on the one hand, like, it's when you're doing these pictorial programs, like, you can make some best guesses, right? You can try and figure out what's going on, but sometimes it is best guess, right? You're always looking at, oh, hi, I've seen horns of consecration over here, and so maybe it means that it meant XYZ. So maybe the same as over here, right? Oh, I've seen blue heads somewhere else. Maybe that, right? So we're looking for all of these small symbols and small cues that we can then use to put the entire thing together. I think these are an incredibly evocative paintings of a culture that, on the one hand, feels very close, right? Because we can see them, we can see what they're doing, we can see what they looked like, we can see how they dressed, we can see what some of their concerns were. But on the other hand, they feel very far away because, again, this is a story. We don't know what the story is, right? All we see is that there was some importance to this story, and it was important enough that it made it into this ritual building. When we look at this building, it is almost certainly not somebody's house. Okay. This might be the closest thing that we have to a shrine or a temple at Akrotiri. It was almost certainly a building that was used for ritual purposes. And there's a few archaeologists that think, all right, the ritual purposes probably had to do with puberty rituals. So it's kind of an interesting interpretation. It's an interesting set of paintings. But that's kind of what we're doing when we're doing a contextual analysis, is we're trying to figure out what the deeper meaning or the deeper use or the deeper function of some of this art is. And we will practice these. Okay. We will practice these. I brought in a lot of information that you won't always necessarily have, that I will make sure that you do. But there we go. And for our next video, we're going to move out of Crete and move over to the Mycenaeans.